Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to all of you for coming. Thanks to Michael Rosenfeld Gallery and to the Benny Andrews Estate. It's a real pleasure to be able to join Will and Maria for this conversation about Benny's work. I'll say that the body of work that we're getting to look at kind of considers three separate migrations that all had a kind of very personal significance for Andrews. We're talking about the Great Migration, the Dust Bowl, and the kind of movement that happened during that, and as well the Trail of Tears. Benny, the personal kind of relationship that Benny has to all of those is that his familial history includes folks who are Black, white, and Cherokee. And so all of those stories and the ways that that narrative kind of comes together in this work, I think is one of the things that really makes it so special and makes it such a joy to be able to see all together here for the first time. I think I would actually like to start by kind of asking each of you if you can talk a little bit about Benny's work. Specifically, I think there are many aspects, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of them, but of materiality and narrative. I think that might be a really great place for us to start the conversation. Both what drew you to the work, but also the resonances maybe that you find in the kind of work that each of you are making individually as well.
Will, would you like to go?
I can start. I guess when I think about that relationship, it's immediately the collage and the materiality of the paintings. Benny has this low sort of relief in every painting, and upon looking at them on like a photograph or something, you don't always see it. And I feel like I have the same problem thing. Like I like that for there to be something to really to see, and to a texture or a physical presence on the surface of the painting, that when you're in front of it, it's like you kind of, that's the moment where you actually like get that piece of it. But I also like that he just is a sort of a student of history, that he's really engaged, really interested in history, and really willing to kind of the ambition to try to take on those narratives and kind of understand them and learn more through the making of the work. So yeah.
I learned first about Benny's work through Kyle. Kyle and I went to graduate school together, and when I took a job at Pratt Institute, we would arrange moments for him to share about Benny's work, and also to come to the studio to see the archive. And that is sort of my introduction to Benny's work. I personally love his drawings. I think that there's something to his silhouettes, to the way that he gestures, the kind of the liveliness of the gesture is like authentic. And for me, that's something that I've always gravitated towards. And then I'm really a fan of his use of textiles in the work, cloth, napkins, whatever. And I remember learning about kind of how he came to that. And I think that there's something quite beautiful about seeing a textile in the work, like something from a canvas or a drop cloth or a napkin or something that somebody wore. I feel like there's a certain sense of like narrative imbued in that that's like beyond the figures. But I also really appreciate that there are like history paintings that he's researching, that they have that kind of view of them as like a record, a way to keep people's memory of an idea, and to share stories. I think it's super powerful. And so I think this show actually is a really great installation of his work. It's so broad, you get so much of a range, and so I'm really blessed to be here today with all of you. But yeah, I feel like I could go on, but I think that there is a kind of realness to the work, and there's also a level of care for the figures and the story.
So I wonder, I think one of the things too that has struck me about seeing the show and the kind of opportunity to look at everything is also everything that's happening right now, right? The political situation for migrants, not only here in the United States, but also in Europe and in many other places in the world. And I feel that sense of political inevitability and the kind of depth with which he's kind of approaching those subjects is something that also makes the work feel very relevant, not only to the kind of moment in which it was first made, but also to this moment now. And I wonder if we can kind of like jump in and kind of think about that kind of span of time, because we're looking at a project that was made, we were very fortunate to have some materials that were shared with us by the estate, and looking at the journals that Benny kept during extensive road trips that he made all over the United States, looking at the following trails, basically. One of the things, Hallie, you mentioned actually when we were talking about thinking about those travels is that there's a little bit less information around the Great Migration, really because that's something that Benny lived as an artist and as someone kind of growing up in the rural South in Georgia and then making his way north. But I wonder if we can kind of like start to unpack a little bit the kind of political efficacy of the kind of work, and if that's something that strikes either of you.
Yeah. Well, I think the key for me is if you watch the video, he makes this one comment where he says these people were going from hell to hell. Mm-hmm. And that, for me, really summed up the type of, I guess, the framing of these particular migrations. And of course, they have a relationship to why people migrate, across the globe. Almost always it's starting with some sort of tragic moment or violence or an excitation of power. Mm-hmm. And so I think when looking at the show, when I first walked in, it was this piece here at the front. It's a train platform, and it's colored in white, and you see it's called Northward Bound. If you read the title, I love that he was very specific about titles and thought about how that all came together. And you see all the black people on one side going northward bound, and very few white people on the other side. But the painting really shows the boundaries of the society, at that time. And thinking about where people are going and why. When I think about all these migrations, I'm not like a historian or anything, but I like kind of into it. And what's fascinating about the Dust Bowl, when we talk about power, is that this is it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The people that were there were given land. They were, people were displaced, Native Americans were displaced from this land, and white people were given this land, and it was extracted to the point of breaking, and nobody cared about what happened to the people, that were actually working that land. Mm-hmm. It was just about like squeezing as much out of that place as possible. So, I don't know, you see all of those things happening in the world today. Colonialism is not over. We see it happening in so many places where, labor and resources are, just being extracted. Capital has no sort of, it's not, seems like endless gluttony or something.
We were chatting. I feel like a lot of good conversations happened before a talk, and I feel like it is really fascinating that Benny took the time to travel, to go en route, because there's something that, there are photographs of, I think specifically like the Dust Bowl and the migration that happened. And I know like Octavio Solis, the writer from Oregon, writes really beautifully about, in his plays, about this specific topic. And I've also read Steinbeck, so there's a little bit of that. And I think that there's something quite beautiful about the way he's treating the landscape, like the color and the space that the figures are in. And maybe there's something to those travel, like to be able to really feel the temperature or feel the expansiveness of land. You have to be there. I was recently in New Mexico, and you can't really imagine what New Mexico feels like unless you are right in front of those rocks and like seeing the color and the heat. So I think that it sort of shows something about Benny, that he did really admire that first experience, that the research is not just the archive of photographs and film and all of that, but that it is in order to like really feel how they felt maybe as the sunrise came up or went down and the sun sets. And so I think that there is a kind of emotiveness to that that's beyond just the research or capturing the story that has been told before, specifically for the parts that he didn't himself experience, right? And then, I guess it's like public knowledge, but my family immigrated from Mexico in 1999, and so we came to Northern California, and I come from a kind of farming family, and so I really relate to the subject matter. I feel like it is not just it's our connection to the land, our connection to harvest, our connection to agriculture, and our connection to even human labor has always been a challenge for all of us, right? And maybe it's getting a little bit, that gap between our labor, our production, and the market is getting wider, right? What capitalism is sort of thinking about, and maybe there's a refocusing that has to happen. And I think that that's partly why the works are so important today, because that refocusing of our relationship to each other and to the planet and to land has to be shifted slightly. And I think, I'm a believer that art can help us get there, and I do think that that is the kind of power of the testimony, or the power of storytelling through art. So anyway, I think it's so timely that he made this work, and as a person who seems very organized about and kept a thorough record of everything, I think he planned this. I think he knew, we all know that this is a moment of crisis, and it will go on for a very long time, as it has been going on for a while. So, thank you for bringing forth the story, because it is something that's in the consciousness of all of us today and many artists around the planet.
Mm-hmm. I wonder too, I think one of the things that really stands out to me as so significant is the sense of reserve. There's a real sense of joyousness in the physicality of the paintings and the way that the paintings are being built. And we also don't get to often talk about paintings being built in that way. And I think that's certainly something that both of you share with Andrews. I think, though, that sense of the way that he's able to thread the needle, being quite reserved, but still celebratory. It strikes me that in one of the works of the migrant camp, that the camp itself feels kind of grim, right? And we're looking at materials in there that are really reserved, really done colors, really kind of straightforward. There's a kind of immediacy to it. And then all of a sudden, if we kind of trace up, you end up seeing the kind of really gorgeous colors that are happening in the trees. And that's Benny kind of getting to be a painter, right? Getting to celebrate that. But I think that sense, or even the work that's behind us, that sense of reserve, of kind of not, it's both a celebration, but it's also at the same time a kind of excoriation of a culture that produces that kind of result. And that physicality, if we can kind of jump back into there, I wonder if both of you, I think it's interesting because both of you do have that sense of physicality. We're talking about building paintings, right? And I wonder if we can just like stop on that for a minute, because I think it's a really special part of the work, and something that I feel like also makes the work so eminently approachable, right? So you don't have to come to the work with a whole knowledge of art history to be able to just find joy in what's actually happening on the surface of the canvas. And I think that that is something that is really special, that the works invite that kind of curiosity. And hopefully that curiosity generates into a kind of knowledge about the stories that are being told. But I wonder if there are riffs that either of you have, kind of thinking about the physicality of the work, especially in relation to the kind of work that both of you are making.
I can go first. I feel like you can write about a story, you can make a journal, and he was a great writer, so I'm sure he could, type it up. But I feel like there is something quite beautiful and playful about what it means to make, right? There's the need to tell a story, and then there's just the playfulness of making art, of moving through the materials, of doing the color, of taking the extra time to make sure the textiles have the pattern, because the pattern itself is history. Whether it is the material fibers or whether it is actually woven material, woven color, I think that there is something quite gorgeous about that. Or the painting right behind you, which those stones, that was actually extra care, right? Thinking about his range between just a very simple, very beautiful line that in the drawings, where the range is really about that lyrical mark making and the simplicity, the reduction, but really how much does it say with the kind of minimal gesture, to the pieces where you really have both the painted face, but you also have the sculptural. You have the headdress, you have the details on the jeans, and the fact that some of it is actually textile. I mean, there is like a level of like love and care and literally building out these figures, giving them life. Anyway, so I really, in order for me to like truly enjoy the sculptural relief, I like to think about that range between the drawings that you see in some of the rooms, all the way to the really kind of built out. Even that moment of the deck there where, I'm not sure, it's just actually kind of a mass floating forward beyond the frame in a very low relief sculptural type of painting. So there's a likeness as well to some of the boats in the far, where they're just kind of almost like air or wind, and they're sort of just gesturally painted to the kind of weight of the sculptural element. I mean, there is a weight to the story as well, but I think that the balance between the sculptural aspects and the color and the pattern and all of that, it is a kind of uplifting feeling, right? Because some stories can be heavy, but really the touch of how it's sort of narrated or told or visually told can balance that out. And maybe that's where like hope lives a little bit, in that level of care and delicate detail.
Yeah. You made me think it is a type of an illumination. And he had, of course, I mean, he's a student of painting. And, we think about that collage element as so maybe new, but you can find that in, gilded paintings in the Renaissance, and to be in front of those things, or to be in front of something that's like super physical and in your space and has relief at the same time. So I see those relationships to that, and I also think about that as a sort of contrast, because these aren't like, it's not like gold, foils, and it's not, or wood carving. It's a lot of this, to understand, are just pieces of old paintings that have been lying around and stepped on and, here and there, or cut out of another painting. So the way that I think about it is it's really trying to or the way I think about it is trying to imbue a sense of time in the painting that is that you couldn't really achieve without these materials actually having lived a real life. There's something about all of these little bits that they're sort of carrying and they're sort of carrying a real energy to them and a real resonance that they've been touched over and over again over time, and he finds this right moment to pull them in to the painting. So I think when I'm sitting in front of them, I'm really experiencing time in a really different way than if I were in a place of complete illusion, complete flatness and illusion. I feel like I'm both, maybe I'm with, or like I'm very present with the materials, and therefore I'm very present with the figures and the narrative that's sort of taking place in front of me.
Actually, when you kind of bring up this idea of temporality too, one of the things that really strikes me is the kind of difference in emotional tenor of the three separate parts of the series. Because in the works from The Dust Bowl and The Trail of Tears, we often are kind of looking at landscapes and horizons that are really uncertain, right? The fogginess that's in there, the kind of lack of clarity of where these folks are going, that sense that we don't know, it's this other place, which I think must have been certainly part of what was going through the minds of people that would have been having those experiences, being kind of pushed into who knows where. But then the kind of difference in emotional tenor that all of a sudden when we look at the Great Migration and these incredible and vibrant images of Harlem as a kind of destination point.
It's Harlem, yeah.
And that sense of kind of joyousness and celebration that's in there is a very interesting foil for me emotionally that kind of differentiates all of the work there. I wonder, can we also kind of talk a little bit about the kind of the place of drawing, because I think both of you have kind of brought up the drawing that's in both in the paintings to some extent, but actually in the actual drawings themselves, and the kind of delicacy of that, and kind of understanding the power that he's got in terms of line, in terms of narrative, in terms of establishing narrative, I think is also something nice for us to kind of think through.
Oh my God, I mean, I love the drawings, I just think because they're so, I don't know, they kind of blow me away because they're so exacting. It's almost like he touched the paper and didn't let his hand up until it was finished or something. There's something about the quality of the line, it's just, there's no searching, seemingly, but the paintings are all about, searching and building and touching and over again. So the contrast between the two is really surprising. I don't know, I guess it's just like intimidating to see the drawings they're so confident. It's like completely intimidating. Yeah, that's why I kind of like attracted to them.
Yeah, I mean, there is something through, I guess, the way that you were describing how the textiles were sort of lived and painted, or, they're stained and they have all this kind of liveliness and touch to them, and actually like lived, like they were lived in, or they were used. And so I think that drawing is kind of like that. I feel like that's something quite special about his work, because he's kind of a master of his drawing, like to be able to visualize something in space, and the way he puts it down, he already kind of knows where it will go, right? And the spacing and the kind of perspective of them is quite laid out. And yeah, it just is natural to him. And in a way, I think that the way that he visualizes the figures in the drawing, there's a way in which he visualizes the figures in the paintings. That he kind of already has a feeling of what that body, like the mood of the body. And like when we're down the street here and you see your friend and you see the silhouette from a distance and that's your friend, and I think that there is something to people where they truly know how to draw, where they can capture that essence with effortlessly. And that is part of my love for his drawings, that they have that. And I think that maybe the three-dimensional collage build out of the paintings also offers something else. something authentic in the same way that the drawings do. But yeah, I wish I could definitely draw like Benny. I've been working on it. Gotta look at his journals because I don't know. There's just a liveliness to it.
I mean, it obviously takes a lifetime, right, to kind of get to that point. I think also it was interesting to me to kind of look at the drawings and the paintings as well, and think about the place of narrative in the work, because Benny was also someone who wrote children's books and illustrated them. And that sense of kind of storytelling and the sense of the importance of those stories as something that we bring forward and kind of tell each other, you know, as Joan Didion says, we tell each other stories in order to live. I think that sense of storytelling that kind of propels the work has that very sense in it of kind of wanting to move things forward, right? Wanting to kind of improve. Because although, you know, some of the situations that we're looking at in some of these are kind of grim or bleak situations, there is always that sense of like, you see the touch, you kind of remember what it is to, you know, or can imagine what it is to mold and build this story out, both in a kind of physical way, but also in a metaphorical way at the same time, which I think is also really quite special.
Yeah, I guess I could add maybe to this type of storytelling, the moment with the horse and the cowboy. I feel like over there,
that's
it has a kind of sweetness to it, and maybe it does have some influence from the children's books. What I've always admired in the way the storytelling that is done with Benny is the shadows. I don't know if you'll know, like the shadows are sort of, they're the figures and there's this kind of nicely dark shadow that comes from them, and it sort of tells you the direction of the sun, even if the sun is not necessarily assumed in sort of color of the landscape or color of the city. But there's something kind of jazzy or dramatic and like fun and playful about even the way the shadows are treated. Especially in the one back here where you have the man in a suit and then you have the shadow just drops right below all the way to the edge of the frame. I mean, there's something fun about that.
Yeah, that kind of sense of grounding, I think is, yeah, you had.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was talking to Dean the other night that, because I've seen a lot of this work and knowing Benny's migration from low country south, there's something about that touches everything he does that still has a sense of that place. And then like if you look at all of the work, even these have, and I think it's in the tree, it's kind of like in the trees and in the vegetation. There's something about these that no matter, even if he's talking about these this sort of historical moments that he's learning about, there's something still very true to his lived experience. That find their way into all of these pictures, and I think it is in the vegetation. I think it is in the physicality of the material. You know, something maybe. It seems like he's somebody who probably didn't throw anything away. You know,
Yeah.
that, you know, kept things and reused them and gave them multiple lives or something.
Yeah, it's interesting as someone also who grew up with a large amount of siblings, right, and who were actually kind of working part of the year and farming on the land, sharecropping. And I think that sense of that kind of rootedness and that sense of place that's there is something that I very much kind of take out of the work. That both the kind of connection to place that's like now, the now in which we're kind of getting to look at the work, and maybe this kind of points back at that sense of temporality that you're talking about, but also a kind of sense of continuity. In terms of thinking about that relationship to story, but also to lived experience in the same way. And I think that's partially for me also what makes it so relevant to kind of thinking about all of the different exoduses that are happening all around the world, that somehow these can stand in some way for lots of different experience.
I was going to say there's lots of space in the paintings. There's lots of I guess when I'm looking at them, there's lots of I think about it as like mental space. There's lots of the subject matter is fairly intense, but the way that you pointed out this kind of like vast spaces, the emptiness, but I feel like they give you some time to kind of sort of like think about exactly what what's happening. I think that this one behind us, is interesting just because that vast, the vast horizon, and a kind of really beautiful sunset. But these people are moving on, like they're doing a lot of work right now, so there's something interesting about that, clash between the reality of what is happening in the foreground and a kind of I don't know, the way he's kind of building through the aesthetics of the work, a kind of mysterious or contemplation of a future that that's not known. But I feel like he does it in all of these.
Yeah.
And I'm particularly like drawn to the ones with the spray paint. So I just think that they're maybe even like, I don't know if that's even more hopeful or something in those that maybe, and then of course in Harlem, those things that they really explode.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that, narratives coming through color, through material, through the juxtaposition of spaces, it's really, super dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hadn't seen this much work by Benny before. I mean, I've been to the art fairs and to the studio and the archive, but I think it's quite nice to see the different rooms, and sort of when you walk into the room, you really feel that vibe. I'm in the city, this is what it feels like, the buildings and the energy of the street. And so I think that really complements the different approach with, like, for example, the paintings in this room. That there's something about the sky, the kind of openness, like you were saying, of the background, referencing a type of sky. It's a kind of narrative time, maybe. So yeah, anyway, I wanted to sort of point out that I feel like you can really, in this exhibition, really get the kind of range. Especially with the spray paint, I was like, oh, like I really feel that. That's like the color and the texture and the kind of atmosphere has a relationship to the atmosphere in some of the other works. But yeah, I feel like the color is just so vivid, especially in those works over there. I was like trying to catch a glance from this side, but there's a wall in my way.
Yeah, that sense of lightness that's in the spray paint, that kind of, it's like a quick breath somehow, and that sense of the way in which it kind of captures light and scintillates is something that I feel like is a very special part of those works. And then just also the kind of joyousness that's in them, right? The figures and all of the kind of interactions between them. And so we're looking at all of these also little kind of micro narratives within a lot of these, right? We can kind of look at familial relationships in some of them. We look at these, folks who might be catcalling somebody else, or, all of these ways. There's also a really kind of extra special moment in the journals where he's kind of talking about during the Great Migration, during the Dust Bowl, seeing figures pull away in a car and kind of having a sense that the folks who are left behind, who are kind of waving people off, it's going to be the last times that those people will see each other. And so that sense of gravity also that's in it is very grounding, very, very real. I think that's
Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe the Harlem thing is just because it's a place that he really knows and really experienced.
Yeah.
And I think, like, when I look at the show, it's interesting. There's, I don't know, if you guys look around, you'll see there's this one female figure waiting by the tracks. And it's like, I don't know, it's like Goodbye. I forgot the name of the painting. It's over here. But you start to see her in these other these other iterations. This is almost the same exact figure, just sort of standing there waiting, but she's in front of these guys, and then all of a sudden you see this kind of like singer belting it out at the Cotton Club, and it's kind of interesting for me because I was looking at all that. I was like, is this the same person that was waiting on the tracks over there? Through the installation of the work, or through the dealing with the subject over multiple paintings, it seemed like this kind of character kept coming back and living a different life. So I think that's kind of interesting, that maybe the Great Migration, in a sense, is not as represented, but there's something more pointed about what his maybe particular view of that experience is.
I think there's also one of the things that I'm struck by too, as you're kind of talking about this, is that we also have these two other kind of grounding paintings within the presentation of Benny at work on paintings from the series, which I think is really special. We also, there's a really incredible video, for those of you who haven't had a chance to watch, by Stanley Stanisky, and this was actually done during the process of some of Benny's travels, and after he comes back, and kind of thinking about like what it was to actually be on that journey, right? And so to kind of think about what it is to kind of take that material in hand and to have the weight of telling this story. And those, for me, do something really special within the exhibition itself, where it allows us to kind of like understand it as a story, a lived experience certainly, but also as a kind of narrative that we're invited into in that way. And I think that skill that Andrews had in kind of both understanding that this was a story to be told, his story to tell, and the particular way that he was going to do it, that feels also very present for me in all of the work in the exhibition. That sense that here's something that we can kind of take forward into the future. I wonder, are there questions also from anyone in the audience? There may be also people that know many more things than we do, or
I knew Benny very early on. You know, it was an exhibition at a museum that doesn't exist anymore, the Riverside Museum. And the work that he was using textiles in the work, but it was so different from this. You know, this is so specific. You know, this is so in a way illustrative. You know, and that work was so experimental. And so, but his personality was like, you know, very assertive, very all over the place. It was really, so it's like this great encompassing, you know. He's up to it. He was up to it. He was always up to it.
yeah, thank you for that point. I think that actually points also for me to something that maybe is not as apparent within this room, but is thinking about all of the political organizing that Benny did as a kind of co-founder of the Black Emergency Cultural Coalition, as also as someone who did a great deal of work instructing incarcerated folks and bringing art to the prison system. As a kind of way to actually recuperate a story, and how to tell it differently. And I think that's certainly also something that feels it's happening in this work, but we get to see the kind of action that he took in a very different way through that same lens.
Most of these films, you know, I never even associated him with the particularity of, you know, figuration, storytelling, not in that way.
Mhm.
So it's really a revelation.
Excellent. Do you have any other things that we haven't gotten to talk about yet that you're burning to talk about?
Well, I think it makes sense that he would make this type of work especially towards the end of his life, when thinking about his activism, his contribution to community. And I wish I'd met him because it sounds like he was a pretty fun person and like very talkative and very initiative driven. So I know him through the archive and seeing his notes, and I guess this is one more way for him to contribute beyond just sort of organizing and contributing on the daily, but to think about the story. And I guess one thing is that, especially with the stories that he didn't live himself, like there is a kind of distancing that happens as a narrator or as a painter to the stories you haven't actually personally lived. And maybe there is a little bit of a distance to the paintings, I think. But I feel like that is, I was thinking about scale and how small the figures are in relationship to us, and thinking about how that sort of puts the story sort of beyond us as witnesses. Like we are witnessing the paintings and the story unfold, and that in a way a painter is kind of a witness, a record keeper, and thinking about the portraits at the entrance of the exhibition, that they are sort of telling us who the narrator is, in this case, Benny. I don't know, I was thinking about the authorship of the work, because I have seen some of the other paintings, and the figures are very sculptural. They always feel like they're a real person, a person that he knew, even if they're maybe a stand-in. I think there are people in our lives that influence our work, where they might not know it, but they end up in our paintings. And I think that there's something to some of those figurative paintings where it feels like an individual. There's a kind of realness to it, and maybe less of a narrative distance, or
It's a nice point that you make, Maria, too, about the scale of the figures, right? Because in the end, we see these kind of figures that are massed together, where there's maybe a little bit less of a kind of sense of individuality and more of a sense that here are these folks who are maybe a bit harder to see. And certainly in the journals, Benny talks about the fact that, he has some reservations. He talks about the fact that when he's actually tracing the trail of tears, that there are so many things that he's learning just every day by and he's also actively at that time meeting with other individuals along there, historians, other artists, but just general kind of everyday folks, and talking to them and asking about what are their familial histories, things like that kind of animate the land for him at the same time as he's kind of thinking about those. And so that sense of scale is something that also really does this in a kind of particular way. So it's nice to kind of hear you talk about it in that sense.
I guess I would just add that I think incorporating what you're saying about scale, that I feel like the activist in him is the thing saying, look at all of these people, and we all have these kind of intersecting, and we all have these things in common, and we have these intersecting histories, but often these things are taught and separate or disconnected from each other, and in various sort of vacuums. So even this scaling is like bringing it's hard sometimes. I know these are 3 different migrations, but as I look at the paintings, sometimes I don't know if that's a black figure, a white figure, or a Native American figure. As you look around, I feel like I look at the paintings, I'm like trying to figure out through the painting which migration this is actually talking about, and what are the clues that give me some sense of what those are. But you could easily if you move too fast, you could easily see all of these 3 migrations, sort of at some point in these paintings, seemingly all similar, the same people, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed like he was someone who cared about bringing people together. Right?
Yeah, and cared about people's individual stories in that same way. That sense for me also of the way that just as a whole, all of the works kind of lace up together to kind of create, working in series, because it was always envisioned as a kind of magnum opus, as a large series of work that would all be all the stories are interconnected. And it certainly points to the fact that, it's very much a kind of living archive of all of this experience that we get to see when we look closely at these works. Yeah. Any last questions? Observations?
I guess I have a follow-up. I have a follow-up to your comment, because it really made me think about the fact that you're right. The car, the details on every sort of aspect of the painting is in a way even more rendered than like the features, and certain like actual demographical, like anything that we could read. So there's a kind of maybe a protection to it. Like we see a lot of people's backs, we don't quite see a lot of their features, and maybe there is something to that, the fact that the figures, the actual like facial, like everything else seems a lot more real than even sometimes the specifics of that specific character in each of the paintings. So I agree with you. I know the one painting you're talking about where the horizon line, the train tracks are like a triangle.
Yeah.
It's quite beautifully done. One of my favorite moments is on the painting on the right, where you have a mother and child, and their little faces are like painted on like a three-dimensional surface, and you just have enough information to know what the features might look like, but not incredible amount of information to like really be like, that is that specific person. So I think that there is a kind of slight distancing, and maybe that is what's necessary sometimes when we're thinking about larger stories and the kind of history painting, right? That to me they are a different approach to history painting. I don't know. You inspire me there.
You can have the last word.
Excellent.
Oh, there's a person in the back.
Yes.
I think I don't know. I mean, there's like this hopelessness, and then there's this hope, this wide vastness that's going on in it, and then there's this texture that it's weariness. It's like getting there, trying to get there. It's building up a sense of getting to that place where you really want to be. You know what I mean? That perhaps you might find the magic in your life.
Yeah. Magic is very much a kind of something that I've been thinking about as I'm even looking at some of these things, because it's very much about kind of imbuing something into these figures. And exactly that sense of kind of hopelessness that you're talking about is something that, for me, the kind of transformative moment is the art that Benny brings to it. And it is, in its way, that spark of possibility that exists in what otherwise might be a kind of grim scene. Yeah.
It's interesting, when we organized our first exhibition of Benny's work at the gallery, we chose we organized our first exhibition of Benny's work at the gallery. We were on a long journey with Benny. It was the beginning of that journey. We wanted our first exhibition to sort of capture the essence of his art, who he was. And the exhibition was called There Must Be Heaven. And there was so much sort of darkness in most of the work, but we knew that there also was this spark of optimism that somehow it was all going to be okay. And in a way, we don't see the end of the story for these migrants, but there is a sort of sense of the optimism that possibility.